Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 2 live stream for the RBC Heritage. Going to break down what to expect for conditions tomorrow, how to attack the DFS slate, both from strategy and lineup construction, and how to look at the Underdog and Prize Picks board. So a lot of information we're going to go through here, all of your live questions down in chat as well, and ready to get after it for this Friday of action. First off, hopefully all of you are having a fantastic Thursday evening, and also we're able to enjoy some of the golf today. Course was definitely easier here in 2024. You had soft conditions, a lot of birdies being made, which led to maybe some surprises up there on the leaderboard. Some of your first timers have done really well at the Heritage, and you had guys like JT Poston, a guy we mentioned on our live stream yesterday, go absolutely nuclear with the 63. So those are the kind of scores that we don't typically see at this event because it can be a little bit tricky, but pretty cool to see some of that scoring out here in 2024, and hopefully everyone's had a solid start to their week. For DFS myself, I've gone off to a pretty hot start. Almost all of my single entries are cashing. In fact, all of them except for one. And then over there for the prop side, it was about the exact opposite. In fact, I cashed none of my slips today. So certainly a little bit fired up because of the prop stuff. Whenever I get a bad day, I don't get knocked down too quickly. I get back up with an absolute vengeance. So hopefully we can match that DFS energy out here today and get back after it on that side too. So hopefully you guys are having a better week than I am out there on the prop side, and we can get this thing rocking. So first off, just going to welcome on in everyone into chat. We got Camera Bro down there. What's going on? Barry, James as well. We got Steven, Derek, Why I Win, Lee. What's going on, everyone? Hopefully you're having a solid start to your evening. So just want to start it off with our sponsor for this live stream, which is going to be Ship It Nation. So we're going to talk a lot about this later on, go into full detail about what you can find on their website. But this live stream, rounds 2 through 4 every single week, are going to be presented to you by Ship It. So I know a few of you down in chat rep Ship It Nation. I see you guys over there in their Discord, a partnership that we started last week and are going to be continuing through the rest of this season. So you're going to see that on the thumbnail. You'll see that referenced a few times throughout these live streams. These are presented to you by Ship It Nation. And again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more later on. But let me bring up the golf course and let's hop right into the analysis for today, which we're going to start with the scoring average, which, again, easier than what we saw in 2023. And a couple reasons for that, right? We had low winds today. We also had receptive greens because of all the rain they got last week. And on top of that, shorter rough here in 2024. It's only cut to about 1.25 inches. Last year, it was 2.5 inches long. And all of that adds up to an easier golf course. So you saw that with the scoring average. You saw that with guys going super low, right? Like a JT Poston, even some of your PMT times, like a Colin Morikawa, guys like Seamus Power, got after this golf course. And in fact, if we take a look at the split between the AM and PM, surprisingly, the PM played easier. I have a few theories, right, for why we would see that, because this is very atypical, right? Normally, the morning wave is where we see the easier conditions. And with the winds kind of kicking up in the PM hours, you would think that would happen again, right? You think that that wind kicking up, maybe the greens getting a little bit firmer and faster as the day goes on, would make the golf course harder. And it actually had the exact opposite effect. I believe part of that was due to temperature, right? This morning, it was a little bit cooler than what they had in the afternoon, but I also think it's partially talent level, right? And a lot of your informed top level players out there in the PM wave, guys like Morikawa informed, Aberg, obviously Rory McIlroy had a pretty good showing himself, right? All those guys that were starting later that played well at the Masters, I guess except for McIlroy, right? You can say that about Colin Morikawa, guys like Aberg, were starting in the PM wave. So whether it was a slight talent gap difference, right? The guys in the PM maybe being slightly better players, or that temperature change, you did see a slight bias towards those PM players. So I'm not sure if we're going to see the same kind of advantage again, but if it is going to be about temperature, we're going to have to pay attention to when that temperature goes up out there on Friday. And speaking of, let's just hop into the weather, where I think we might have quite the edge out there for Friday. So the wind situation looks awfully similar to what we had for today. In fact, maybe even slightly calmer when it comes to the winds perspective. In the morning, it's sub 7 miles an hour for the entire time. And then in the afternoon wave, it does get a little bit windier, but I'll emphasize the little bit part there because it doesn't really get all that nasty, right? At most about 10, maybe 11 miles an hour of sustained winds. The wind gusts towards the very end of the day, they'll be finishing up their rounds by like 6 p.m. local. it might get to like 15 miles an hour, right, of sustained wind, of wind gusts, I should say, out there at Harbour Town. So it's going to be pretty calm, all things considered. I think scoring conditions from day 1 to day 2 are pretty similar, all things considered. But like I was saying about that temperature, right, if that's the reason that the PM wave played easier, right, ideally, we want guys that are starting as soon as the temperatures kick up, right? So that would be around like 10:30, maybe 11 a.m. local time. You can see around then is when it gets to 75, 77 degrees. It fully heats up by the time you get to around noon. But if you're starting around, let's say like 10:30, 10:40 local time, it's already pretty much to its max temperature, right? Within just a few degrees out there. And you're going to have no wind for pretty much your entire round, right? If you're starting at like 10:40, you're finishing by like 3, maybe 3:30 p.m. local, and the wind isn't even going to kick up by that time. So in my opinion, the weather's pretty much wide open tomorrow. I don't see a massive edge, but if there were going to be players that got an advantage, I think the guys starting around like 10:30, 11 local time might get a slight little bump, right? If I'm really trying to find any sort of weather edge, that's the only thing that I can think about playing. So there are a few guys in that time window that I'm playing just because of that. And of course, if you want to take some of your early starters, they're going to be playing in pretty still conditions for their entire round 2. I can understand getting there, but I think the guys starting a little bit later are at least my preference, because we saw that little bit of a difference today, right? With that temperature rising, along with the fact that, you know, tomorrow morning it's going to be 66 degrees, right? They're going to be playing in those cooler conditions. If you want to lean into that, right, just go maybe an hour and a half into tee times, because they're still going to be playing in next to no wind. So we'll talk through a few of the players that fit that description in my player pool. But that's it for the weather. Golf course, again, played pretty on par. Like I said, I thought it would play like a stroke and a half under par, and it played 1.64 under, which is why it was so surprising that my props didn't work out today. So again, I'm looking out for revenge on that side, and excited to get into that towards the end of this live stream. But before we do so, now it's time to talk some DFS. So going to bring up my projections, going to go tier by tier on here, and I'll talk through some of my top plays. And I've decided to take ownership off of these spreadsheets. For a few live streams, I had been showing all of the ownership numbers. I'm still going to be able to talk to you guys about some of the higher and lower owned plays. But if you want the exact percentages for anyone that's not a highlighted play, all that is going to be posted on the Patreon page. So you guys know where to find all of the behind the scenes content. That is where I post that. Link in the description for my player pool and all of those projections. But let's go ahead and talk some strategy. And I want to get into some of your questions down in chat here in a second. But in terms of our top level strategy for tomorrow, I mentioned the slight weather edge, right? 10:40 tee time for Xander. He'd be perfect, right, for that kind of narrative. But then it's all about game theory. Rounds 2 and 3 showdown, you see a huge emphasis, a huge bias towards the players towards the top of the leaderboard. So guys that are starting with a -4 or -5 score are going to have much higher ownership, right, than the guys that are closer to even par. So for example, Xander Schauffele, I've got it at like 13.8% ownership, something between like 13 to maybe 15%. I think is reasonable on the X-Man. Guys like Rory Aberg are well, or I should say close to or well over that 20% mark when it comes to their ownership. So it's not a massive difference, right? It's not like it's a 5% play as compared to a 25% play, but you're getting almost half the ownership, right, on Xander as compared to a Ludwig Aberg. And in my opinion, right, all three of these guys start at the perfect tee time. But if you're going to take a shot on somebody for a round 2 showdown, I prefer the guy that's lower owned, right? It's an 18-hole sample. All these guys have the same amount of holes to work with, right? And sure, Scotty Scheffler is, you know, arm and leg better than a lot of the other golfers here. Even he's only going to project maybe like 10 fantasy points higher, right, than some of your lowest players in the field, right? And in any given day, any given, round, any given game out there, right? You know, any given fight in UFC, you see some crazy upsets happen. And in golf, it is even that much more likely that you get that variance. It's a chaotic sport. You get a lot of random people for showdown that go off for like 50, 60 fantasy points, and you have to be willing to embrace that. So my advice for round 2 showdown is pretty much always the same. It is take ownership pivots and really lean into that, right? If there's a weather edge, try and take that as much as you possibly can. That is huge out there for rounds 2, 3, and even round 4 showdown. But if you don't have a massive weather edge, and it's just a little one, right, that we have here for round 2, then you have to play the game theory side. You have to play the game when it goes to building your lineup. So we're going to go tier by tier. I'll point out some of the pivots, but that's my player pool, right? And you can see, you know, I have all the other ownership stuff taken off of here. The dark red guys are just the conditional formatting, right, of the guys that have like the highest ownership that I'm taking, right, the highest ownership player I'm taking is a 15% owned Shane Lowry, right? And that is far from mega chalk out here for round 2, right? Like Matty Fitz, right, is a quote unquote chalky player that I'm taking in my player pool, and he's much lower owned than, let's say, a Cameron Young, who I have well over the 22% ownership mark. So I'm taking a very contrarian stance, and even my guys that I'm taking at ownership are like 15% owned at the very most. So I'm very aggressive about my round 2 showdown. But as you'll see as we go through some of the players, there's still plenty of quality options that you can take that aren't chalky. A lot of guys in round 1 that maybe hit the ball better than their stats would indicate that I'm looking to for a little bit of a bounce back. So before we go tier by tier, I'm going to catch up on chat, remind you guys to throw any questions that you have down there in the live chat, and I'll get to that as soon as we can. Where are we at? You love Zalatoris? Yeah, he's going off in the first group. So could be a look for that alone, right? Best conditions, at least if you're looking for the wins. What's going on, Rev? What's going on? Nate says, ship it, bud. Congrats, of course. Absolutely good price, good site for the price, for sure. And we're going to talk about all the different sports that they cover, right? You know, they cover more sports than most of the other tout sites and for cheaper. And for my money, the best stuff that you can get. So I love it. Cody says, looked for those on the AM guys today, was able to cash. Yeah, so though the scoring average was easier out there for the PM guys, a lot of your ceiling performances were AM guys, right? Like JT Poston, for example. I mean, you had guys like Sahith Theegala, right, went off in the morning wave. Sure, you had your Morikawas, your Abergs that went off in the PM. But you're right, even if you took AM guys today, it probably went pretty well. You just had to have the right guys, right? JT Poston was probably huge if you ended up taking them. And how about our boy JT, right? We talked up the Postman on our live stream yesterday, and he went absolutely nuclear. But let's get through these tiers. Again, any specific players, just let me know down below. And up top, the ownership is pretty spread out. Actually, one of your lower-owned plays here would be a Scotty Scheffler, believe it or not. Xander Schauffele is also relatively low-owned. The reason why Scotty's low-owned is the price tag, right? He's 13 grand for Showdown. So kind of like for the main slate, that's just suppressing some of his ownership. And then the fact that he has a 1:30 p.m. tee time just makes me think that not a lot of people are going to get there. So if you want to get to him as a pivot play, I would understand that. The price tag is where I get a little bit tripped up. So I prefer to go to some of these other 10K options because, like I said before, Scotty, a god amongst men, right? This is clearly the best golfer that we have in the field, but it's only an 18-hole sample, right? He can only be that much better than all of his peers. And at that sort of price tag, it takes you from like a 9K option, right? You could drop down, save like the $2,500, right? From going from a Scotty down to one of these other 10K players. And you could take a 9K guy as opposed to a 6K player, right? Out there in the rest of your lineup. So you have to think about that aspect. So I'm not a huge fan of Scheffler, but he is relatively low owned. You have to worry about the ownership on Rory. Ludwig Aberg also carrying quite a bit of ownership themselves. Even guys like Patrick Cantlay and Colin Morikawa are all much chalkier than what you see here with the Xander or Scotty Scheffler. So that's what I mean by taking the game theory angle. And you can't tell me that guys like a Rory, right, who played horribly last week at the Masters, guys like Cantlay who are out of form himself, Colin Morikawa, right, just a inferior player talent-wise to these other guys up here, are as good as a Scotty is, right? Or as good as even Xander Schauffele is, right? Given the form that he's coming in with. And if they're coming in at higher ownership, that's where you see that edge, right? Out there for round 2 showdown, right? Is fading some of the guys that had their ceiling performances round 1 because it's hard to back up a low performance, right? And now these are elite tier guys, right? They're capable of going nuclear for 2 days in a row. But just because they went nuclear round 1 does not mean that they have a better chance of doing that round 2, right? It's the whole thing with gambling, right, on like coin flips, blackjack, whatever the case may be. Blackjack a little bit less so, right, because there is dependency there, right, between the two hands, right? Obviously, if you're counting cards, you can make it something that you can get an edge on. But like for the coin flip, right, every coin flip is independent of all the other flips. I think people in PGA DFS play it like it's blackjack, right? They play it like the guy's performance the round before is going to truly impact the second round. It slightly does, right? It's why we look at ball striking stats. It's why we take a look at somebody luck sacking it with the putter, for example, but it's not completely dependent, right? It's much closer, in my opinion, to the coin flip where it's completely independent for every iteration that we have. So I think that people put much too much stock into the leaderboard into a 1-round performance and let that impact some of their exposure. So it doesn't mean that you can't play a Rory and Aberg, a Cantlay, or Morikawa. It's just that these 4 should not be your entire player pool, right? If you're taking these guys that are going to be 20, maybe 25% owned at Showdown, right, you're going to run into a lot of leverage issues. So all of them are coming in with that steam. I would say that guys like Rory, Aberg, Collin Morikawa, because they fit that weather narrative I'm looking at, are guys that I would maybe consider a little bit more, right? Even Cantlay, right? He's going off at 9 a.m. I think that's a pretty favorable tee time. That's the only saving grace, in my opinion, on taking those sort of players. Down here towards the 9K range, you also have some chalky guys that are kind of sticking out. So Cam Young would probably be the most obvious. Collin Morikawa, I guess, would be at the top of that 9K range, a pretty chalky player himself. But outside of that, right, Tommy Fleetwood, pretty overlooked, right, close to like 10% ownership. Matty Fitz, I've got it sub 15%. Max Homa also close to that 10% number that we have there with the Tommy Fleetwood. So if you're looking for a pivot, right, Jordan Spieth too, he's relatively low owned. Same thing with Wyndham Clark. This is the spot to do it. So while there's a lot of ownership coming in on these 9, 10K guys, this lower 9K range is being relatively overlooked. And it's pretty obvious to see why, right? Like Cam Young's still getting his ownership because he's -4. You have all these other players here that just kind of spun their wheels round 1, right? Close to even par in almost all cases. And because of that, because they didn't play beautifully out there today, no one wants to play them, right? So I think you're going to see a lot of studs and duds kind of lineups. You know, Scotty's still going to be like 15% out, right? So he's not going to be completely overlooked. People are going to be spending a lot of salary up top. So something that that impacts, right, is the ownership down low. And you'll see, and I guess I don't have the ownership up here, but if you're on the Patreon version, that this 6K range has some significant ownership, right? You've got some guys down here that are higher owned than we typically see for like a round 2 Showdown slate. So just from the lineup construction perspective, I think that studs and duds build, which is normally pretty contrarian, is actually going to be a little bit chalkier for this week than maybe what we're used to seeing. What's going on, Samuel? What are my thoughts on fading Poston? So he's cheap, but he's number 1 on the leaderboard. I'm fading him myself. So I think it's a pretty good idea, right? He's one of those players that's going to get that steam because of how he played today. And it's tough to back up that round. Yeah, he's an easy choice to fade. I completely agree with that. So going down into this 8K range now. So a lot of the chalk down here are some guys like a Sahith Theegala, right? Getting quite a bit of attention. Even guys like a Will Zalatoris, Shane Lowry are getting a pretty good amount of ownership as well. You throw Siwoo Kim in there, Russell Henley into that same conversation. So not a lot of pivots to be had down here. In fact, one of the lower owned plays is looking like it's going to be a Tony Finau, which in my opinion was pretty surprising. I guess Wyndham Clark is $8,900, so he is technically an 8K player. He's also going to be one of the lower owned options. So if you're looking to get different in the 8Ks, right, it's with some of the guys that have struggled, right? Wyndham Clark, because he's over par, right? Tony Finau didn't do much when it came to the birdie production today. But guys like a Siwoo, Russell, even Corey Connors, right, are getting significantly higher ownership than what you have with Tony. And Tony is one of the top birdie makers on tour, right? He hasn't even had a good 2024, yet he's still number 12 on tour when it comes to birdie or better percentage. When you take a look at DraftKings points scored per round, right, just looking at just pure scoring metrics out there, he's in the top 10 players out there on the PGA Tour. So, and that's, again, despite not having a great year. So that sort of player, in my opinion, has the same, if not a higher hit rate than guys like Siwoo, than guys like Russell Henley that played well in round 1. So why is he half the ownership? Sometimes even less than half the ownership than some of the other guys around him. So I know that Tony Finau is not a play that I'm pointing out here, but is somebody that I'd consider. So I guess we mentioned the Xander bit a little bit, right? He's got a good tee time. You probably don't have to be sold that much on playing Xander. It's worth noting that he lost almost all his strokes today with the short game, and that's why he didn't have the best day. So, you know, I'll expect that to turn around, right? I'll take some short game variance and hope it goes in our favor for round 2. So that's what I'm thinking with Xander, also lower owned. Matt Fitzpatrick has been putting the ball really well in round 1. Was, I think, again, a guy that shot better than what his scorecard would indicate. So let me take a look at the shots gained metrics to give you some exact numbers with good old Fitz. I don't know them off the top of my head. So today he gained with the approach play. He gained a little bit with the putter, lost around the green, which is kind of atypical, and then lost off the tee. So obviously you want to turn those 2 categories around and make it a positive day. But the 2 most important categories, right, approach and the putter, were still there for somebody like Matty Fitz. So if he's going to be lower owned, I'll take that shot on him. Shane Lowry played really well on approach today. Was actually pretty horrible with the putter. He lost like 3 strokes with the flat stick. So I don't even think pretty horrible is the way to put it. He was absolutely dog shit when it came to the flat stick today. But that's kind of what we've seen from him of late, right? Over the last 12 measured rounds, that's been his identity. He's kind of lost with the flat stick. I guess if you zoom out a little bit more, you see more of that leaking in, right? Losing 0.1 strokes per round. But he's gained a bunch of strokes at this event in the past. So I'm not going to let that 1 round sample size keep me off of him. And he has that relatively early tee time. Sam Burns is another one of these pivots that I like. So I mentioned Tony Finau, right, being a little bit lower owned. But Sam Burns, too, and the tee time's not great, right? He's going off a little bit later than some of the other plays that we've talked through. But he's like 8.3% owned, right? I have guys like Henley at like double that ownership. Guys like Siwoo Kim at like even more than double that ownership. And Sam Burns is, again, one of those Draftkings scores, right? He makes a ton of birdies. He's up there in the top 25 of birdie or better percentage on the PGA Tour. And that sort of player that can make 6-7 birdies in a round, get hot with the flat stick, is the kind of player I'm looking to get to. And I faded him for main slate because of the baby concerns. So I didn't want to get too over the field because maybe he withdraws like round 3, round 4. But for a single round sample, there's a lot less of that withdrawal risk. Now, it doesn't mean that he's not going to walk off the golf course, right? If he gets the call about his wife going into labor. But at $8,000, I'll take that shot on him fantasy point wise because I know he's that much better than some of these other players. Like just head to head, if you just look at DraftKings points scored, Sam Burns is like 5 points ahead of like a Russell Henley, a Siwoo Kim. And that's despite these two having really good 2024s. Sam Burns kind of being hit or miss out there this year. He just makes so many more birdies, right, than those other sort of players that, in my opinion, he should be the chalk out there for round 2. And because of the leaderboard watchers, the people that are being lazy with their analysis, not looking at shots gained metrics, rather just going out there and seeing who shot well round 1, are going to be funneled towards those sort of guys. Down here in the 7Ks, JT Poston, an obvious piece of chalk, but Seabass, he's also hitting the ball well on approach. I think a lot of people are going to try and tail him. He does have a late tee time. So if the winds really do kick up, which I think is a huge if, I don't think it's going to be much wind at all out there tomorrow, but if that did happen, that could blow him off the golf course. You never know. Guys like Taylor Moore are going to get some ownership. I would say they're at the -3 score. Sepp Straka, I've got it pretty high ownership himself, like 15% there at -5. Tom Hoagie over 10% ownership. Guys like Sanjay, much higher owned for Showdown than what we saw for the main slate. It's all very predictable, right? It's the guys that played well out there that are all getting steamed up. So you can kind of, know that going into a Showdown slate, right, where all that ownership's going to come in. Now, having exact numbers, having projections to go off of is nice, right? So you know how much to take to get 2, 3x the field, et cetera, et cetera. But those are the kind of guys I'm looking to avoid, right? Like a Sepp Straka. I know he had a ceiling round today. It's tough to back that up. So they're almost guys I'm immediately crossing off. JT Poston I already mentioned, right? A player that I'm crossing off there. You can say the same thing about a lot of the chalk down here. A player I'll take a chance on would be like a Harris English, right? In -2 is far from a bad score, but because he's not -3, -4 or better, like some of the other players, he's not getting nearly as much steam. So I've got a Harris English at 6.7%. Now the shots gained metrics weren't ideal today. So if we go ahead, I'll give you guys an idea of how he played. So Harris English was able to gain with the putter around the green, a slight loser on approach, and then a gainer off the tee. So again, not ideal shots gained metrics, but nothing out of the ordinary, right? Like he's got a stout short game and he only gained like 3/4 of a stroke there. He gained a little off the tee. That's kind of what he does too, right? He's all about the iron play. He's very much so a hit or miss player with the irons. In round 1, he was just a slight loser there. So it's not like he completely threw away his round. And that included some stuff on the par 5 where he threw away like a shot and a half around, on approach because of where he ended up hitting his second shot there. I think a lot of that is just kind of chaotic. I think there's a lot of variance, a lot of noise in a 1-round sample size on approach. So I'll take that bounce back, right? He's low owned. He's only 6.7%. And he's also got a 9 a.m. tee time, which might be a little bit early for an ideal, right? I want somebody going off at like 10 in a perfect world, but we're not going to get a perfect world for all of the plays that we're taking. Down here, the bottom end of the 7s, I mentioned Straka as some chalk, but you could say that same thing about like Sanjay. He's getting some attention. Adam Hadwin even getting some ownership there too. Steven Yeager as well. Austin Eckroat also. I mentioned the 6K range, right? Getting a little bit more attention than usual. A lot of that is because of the 10K, right? All these guys getting a little bit more attention than usual. You have to save salary somewhere, right, to get to those players, right? And something that a few tout sites out there conveniently just, I guess, don't include with their ownership projections. Not going to call out any in particular, but they'll have their average salary use like over $50,000. They'll boost the ownership correctly, right, on guys like a Rory down here to Colin Morikawa, but they won't account for the rest of the player pool, right? Like if you're spending more up top, if you're trying to jam in one, maybe even 1.5 players that are 10K plus, it's kind of where I have the ownership right now. It's like 1.5 players on average being used up there in the 10K plus range. Then you're going to have to go into the 6Ks, right? And the players down here that are getting that attention are Mackenzie Hughes, Patrick Rogers getting a bunch of attention, Seamus Power right after his nuclear day, Austin Eckroat, who I mentioned before, and then Steven Yeager at $6,700. These sort of players for a full slate, especially like round 2 full slate where there's 144 or 156 players, would not be that chalky, right? They'd probably be like 3, maybe 5% owned. Because there's only 69 players and everyone's spending up for round 2, I think they're going to be exceptionally chalky. So in single entries, I could see them being 5 to 10%. And in GPPs, I have them at least that 5 to 7.5% range. So they're all not so chalky that you can't play them. Like you can make 1 or 2 of them work in your player pool. But when you're comparing them to guys like an Eric Van Rooyen, for example, who I have at sub 5% ownership, sub 3% ownership, I think out there for the high stakes stuff, it makes them a no-brainer to play, right? Eric Cole, not a perfect tee time, right? He's going off around noon, actually. So kind of like Sam Burns wouldn't be optimal there. But again, I don't think the wind is a huge factor. So you can still play guys starting towards the middle to end of the round. But he's 4% owned. And honestly, his shots gained metrics, he was about neutral in all 4 categories, weren't all that bad. So I'll take a shot on him going out there and having a ceiling round. Nick Taylor, too, right? $6,500, right? He's 5.7% owned, not completely overlooked, but he's like half the ownership of some of those other chalky players. And he's got that perfect tee time at like 10:20 that I'm looking for, right? Like the middle of the morning that I think you'll have the low winds and the higher temperatures. And he's a player I loved heading into the week. Webb Simpson down here would be the cheapest guy we'll talk about here on the live stream. I've got him at about 2.3% ownership, so relatively low, right? Still some people taking him because of the course history, but he's cheap. He's going off in that perfect tee time range, right? 10:50 a.m., so right when the temperatures are kicking up, and he's got some of the best course history imaginable. So the shots gained metrics weren't great for Webb Simpson, but at $6,200, it's not always who you're getting, right, with that price tag. It's what it's buying you up top, right? If you're going to go with the double spend up, let's say you wanted to take a Xander, then you wanted to throw in like one of these 4 that's in a pretty good tee time and playing well. Well, to make that work, you're going to have to take a lower 6K guy. So that's a player that you could do it with. There are a few guys I'm taking down there in the 6Ks. They go out there and make my lineups work. So that's just a little taste, right, of what I'm going with, to not so much give you guys players to tail, right? You know, pick and choose your own players. Don't let my take on somebody completely influence who you're taking, but it's more so to give you insight onto how I'm attacking the slate, right? How I'm determining who I'm going to play, right? The main things that I was considering, right? Weather, that was a huge talking point with almost every player, not all of them, but a lot of the players went through, and then ownership, right? Those are the top 2 things I'm considering. Now, shots gained metrics, great. Course history, great, right? Those are the cherry on top, but they're not the end all be all, right? It's really those first fundamental 2 things we're looking at, right? Ownership and weather, that should be determining most of your player pool. So I think people get bogged down in the stats too much. I think people get bogged down into the picks portion of things much too much out there in DFS. So that's what I'm trying to avoid out there, right? I'll give you guys some of my picks, but it's not just to go out there and tail. You can, that's totally fine. There are people on my Patreon, right, that sign up and just go out there and totally tail my exposure. It's there for that reason, right? For those sort of people, if that's going to be your process. But I don't think that most people should be using that process, right? Most people should be going out there trying to make their own plays, but using my player pool, my exposure as a little bit of perspective, right? Like, hey, what's Luke looking at, right? What sort of players is Luke targeting, et cetera, et cetera. I think that is much more valuable out there for round 2 than any picks that you can go out there and get. Let me see if there's any questions on specific players. If not, we're going to talk lineup construction. Where are we at? What are the 6K guys that I like for round 2 showdown? So I just gave you guys a few, but yeah, there's some ownership down there. So the guys that I would say I would avoid, which I think are probably even more important, right, than the guys I would play, is I'd avoid the guys that went off round 1, right? There's a reason why these guys are in the 6K range. They're not some of your better players, right? They're some of your lower tier talents to begin with. And it's even harder to believe, right, that somebody like Mackenzie Hughes, and Eckroat, a Steven Yeager, is going to repeat that performance in round 2 as compared to like a Rory. Right? Like a Rory and Aberg, I would not be surprised if they went out there and had a good day 2, right? It would just make sense. right? Based on how they're playing and the quality of player that we have there. A Steven Yeager to go -4, like a -5 round 2, certainly not impossible, right? But it's got a much lower hit rate, right, than what you have for those top end players. So I gave you a few that I like, right? I like Cole. I like Nick Taylor a lot. I also really like Webb Simpson, but it's probably even more important the ones that I'm avoiding, right, out there for large field GPPs. Let me go ahead, bring up Draftkings. We're going to do some lineup construction, make a few lineups together, and then talk props afterwards. So if you're here for props, we'll be there in probably like 5, maybe 10 minutes at the very most. So let me see. Was there another question down there? Oh, there's a bunch more. Sorry, I missed a bunch of that. My bad. I thought there was only one question left. So let me circle back to the spreadsheet so I can show you guys that. That is my apologies. StreamYard wasn't updating for me. Of course, I got you. Had great success with the final round showdown for the Masters by taking my tips. Absolutely. That's round 4 showdown is usually one of the better ones, especially when people are only taking the top tier guys. There's a big edge out there, so love it. Birdie's over position was your biggest tip for you and helped you for showdown. That's for round 4 specifically. That's why there's a massive edge, right? People just think it's all about the placement points and then don't realize that on Sunday, right, you had guys like Tom Kim made like 8, 9 birdies. Now, I didn't play Tom Kim. He was like the one guy I didn't play that went off on Sunday, but damn, that would have been nice. Strokes gained. Yes, that it's important. Probably the most important part of DFS. Is there any data evidence that supports the Masters hangover? I test on Scotty just a little worn out. So you could say that about Scotty, right? But then Aber, did he look like he was hungover, right? Some of the guys up top that played about the Masters that are playing well this week, right? It's hard when you have examples in both directions. So I don't have any data on that, or else I'd give you what I've seen. But yeah. Ross says, what about Bryce Garnett? Recent tour winner. Yes. Won the, the Puerto Rico Open, and a relative of Kevin Garnett. Something tells me that they're not related. I like what you're saying there, though. Let's look at the shots gained metrics. I think that's a good spot to start with good old Garnett. I don't know what he shot. I didn't see anything from the guy today, so I'm running blind on him. He gained around the green. He gained with the putter and lost with the ball striking. Now, is that off-brand? No, right? Garnett's not really a striker, right? He's not known for that. Now, he'll have his days, right? He has good ball striking days. But yeah, I don't know. It's an ugly play. Hey, if you're playing a GPP, go for it, right? You got to get wild somewhere. Crazy shit happens in Showdown, and you got to embrace that. So I don't think he's going to be chalky. That's for sure. So if you're looking for a pivot, let me double check on my other tab where I've got him at for ownership. I believe it's sub 2%. So let me give you the exact number while I can here. Oh, wrong tab. What was that? The salaries? There it is. There we go. I've got Garnett at 1.7% ownership. So not bad. Yeah, you could definitely take him for a little bit of leverage. I think it's a nasty play. You're not going to feel great about it, but there's a time and place for that. That's for sure. Xander would have been death if there was a cut this week. For sure. That's why it's a no-cut event, right? So, yeah, hypothetically speaking, you're right, but it's not. So I don't give a fuck. Samuel says, can we say there's under 8K are the value plays and the above are core? For sure. Yeah. I have to say, Samuel, it's not like I'm going to be taking them in the same sort of leverage. I'm not betting them for outrights right after round 2. But yeah, you know, the guys that I'm pointing out here are some of my favorite plays. That is definitely safe to say. That's for sure. What's going on, Jordan? Hopefully you're having a solid day. Who's the one guy that didn't play great that you're wanting to play tomorrow? I got you. So yeah, Kep, the guy that didn't play great that I'm playing, I mean, Xander would be like number 1, right? Like he played horribly. He could never do it again right after he had round 1. People are tilted about him down in chat, right? How could you ever want to play Xander after how he played today? Well, because he lost 1.7 strokes around the green, and he lost a stroke with the flat stick, right? Almost 3 strokes with the short game, which is atypical. Right? He's normally very stout in those 2 categories. And he was a gainer off the tee and a slight loser on approach. So sure, yeah, +1, not great, right? Like 2.5 strokes worse than the field, but almost all of that was the short game. So yeah, it's Xander to me, man. It's a spend up, and he does it every week, right? He'll start off a little bit slow. He did it at the Masters, and then he backdoored to top 10. So I can see that same thing happening again. Derek says, what is the difference for planning your team between round 2 and round 4? So yeah, round 4, you do have to take some chalk. Round 4, I take more chalk than round 2. It's because of the placement points, which matter, but like I was saying, are not the end all be all. So round 2 Showdown, I'm more contrarian than round 4. Round 4, I'll mix in a few guys starting in the top 5, but round 2, round 3 Showdown, man, I play extremely, extremely contrarian. I take huge stances against the field. Pretty much if you're chalk and you're not a 9-10K player, I automatically fade you for round 2, round 3 Showdown. Now, up top, I'll take a few pieces of chalk from time to time, taking a few right out here for this slate, but I am very much so leaning into that game theory edge, that's for sure. Sub 2% cousin of the NBA champ, Kevin Garnett. You'll take the dart throw on him. I love it, man. Go for it. All right, let's talk through this lineup construction. So let me bring up Draftkings. We'll build a few lineups together. And then, like I said, we're going to talk about props. So in terms of building lineups, this is the kind of thought process I'm going through. And for round 4 Showdown, main slate, right, I think it's a lot more involved than what I have for rounds 2 and 3. Because main slate, I'll take some chalk, right? Over a 4-round sample, some of the best plays are going to get there, right? Round 4 Showdown, right? Some of those top 5 finishers. So I think taking chalk is necessary in those 2 formats. That's my take on it. I take much more chalk for main slate and for round 4 Showdown. For rounds 2 and 3, right, my highest owned player is like a Matt Fitzpatrick, is like a Shane Lowry, is like actually one of the higher owned plays that I'm probably going to get to for round 2 Showdown. And because of that, I could play whoever the hell I want to. And I literally mean that, right? My round 2, round 3 process is about 5-6 times faster than what I have for main slate in round 4, because I can select all my players in my player pool, my optimizer. I could set max exposures, so the max amount I want, right, of each player, and then run my lineups and upload them. It is quite literally that simple, because of how different I make my lineups, because of how much I lean into the game theory angle, I don't have to worry about that whatsoever. So the only thing that I would do on an optimizer, and that I'm probably going to do for at least half of my exposure, is force in at least like 3 guys from that tea time window, right? From the weather edge. So what I'll do is I'll take all the guys from 9:30 a.m. to like 11 a.m. local time, and I'll set a roll in half my lineups to take like at least 3 guys, right, that are starting in that tea time wave. So that's really the only thing I'll be doing for my process for round 2. But outside of that, because of how different my player pool is, it makes my life so simple, right? I mean, it's great. Now, if you want to get different with your lineup construction, right, and add in more leverage, you can. But if your player pool is as different as what mine looks like, you don't have to worry about that. So I guess just to go through some of the chalk to give you guys an idea of where I think a lot of the field is going to go. Right? I mentioned guys like a Rory, Aberg, Cantlay, and Morikawa being chalky. I could see a lot of people starting like an Aberg, trying to take their second man in as somebody like, it's either a Cam Young at 9,100, which I think would be more balanced, and they put you at like 7,600, or spending up for somebody like a Morikawa. So I think a lot of people are going to go, maybe it's Rory man in, and then one of these 9K guys is your second man in. So this is not a lineup that I really like building, right? I don't like these 2 players because they're chalky, but this is the kind of way that people are going to be building lineups. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take Aberg and I'm going to throw Cam Young in there, who's the chalkiest player I have for round 2 Showdown. Down here in the 8K range, I can see a lot of guys throwing in like a Lowry early, where like I like him for round 2, but I do think he's going to be played. That puts you at like 7,200 remaining per player. Down here in the 7K range, somebody like Glover, Tom Kim, right, is going to be a popular play. Tom Kim's irons are really good today. Has, I believe, an early tee time, but let me double check on that. So good old Tom Kim, has a 9 a.m. tee time. I could see him, right, fitting into this relatively chalky build. And what we're doing here, right, is just getting an idea for what the rest of the field is going to do. So you could throw him in there. I think Taylor Moore will be pretty popular. Seabez, with how he's hitting the irons, is I think going to get a lot of attention. And this sort of lineup would be way too chalky in my opinion. You have no pivots here. You have chalk up top, guys that are like 15, 10% owned down here in the 7K range. And unless you're leaving salary on the table with your last man in, unless you're taking somebody that's like sub 2% owned, I think you're going to run into issues here. So this is why I avoid some of these chalky players, especially towards the top end of the board, because down there in the 7K range, you have absolutely, no room to work with. Now, if I was going to edit this chalky lineup to make it work for a large field GPP, the 2 guys that I would change to make that work would be Lowry. Even though I like him, I would change him there and I would take Seabez out. So rather than taking a Shane Lowry, I would go down here and throw Tony Finau in. Tony Finau, half the ownership, gives us a lot of product ownership flexibility, right? He's like sub 10% owned, but just huge in the 8K range. And then for our 7K play, rather than going Seabez, I would try and find a pivot here. So Akshay Bhatia, right? Spending up a little bit, taking him at even par, sub 10% ownership would be a way to differentiate yourself compared to that other build. So there are ways to fit in the chalk, right? Like an Aberg or Cam Young up there in that 9-10K range. It's just it has an impact on the rest of your lineup. If you're starting with less chalky players, like let's say a Xander, maybe your second man in is a Jordan Spieth, right at $9,000. Well, now down here in the 8K range, I don't care if I'm taking a chalky Shane Lowry. I don't even care if I'm taking a relatively chalky Poston if I wanted to. Now, I'm not playing Poston. I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole right out there for round 2 showdown, but you get the point, right? Because we decided to get some leverage in that 9-10K range, now we can afford to go down here and splurge on ownership. So, we cover this on all of our live streams. I'm sure some of your regulars, right, are probably tired about hearing about lineup construction, but it's the most important part about DFS, right? And if you're new to DFS, right, you're, watching these videos to try and learn what to do, it's important to go over it. So not going to spend too much more time on that other than what we just said, but that is what you need to be thinking about when building lineups, right? If you're going to be taking some more chalk, I'm not, right? Like I said, my process is going to be much easier, but if you are taking some chalk, just think through all of that before you do so. Last thing I want to go through is some cash plays. If I was playing cash, I would be trying to target those 10 a.m. tee times. So whether it's Xander, whether it's a Rory or an Aberg, even Cantlay, Morikawa, I think starting with at least 2 of these guys would make a lot of sense. So I would throw Cam Young in there too, actually. Of these 6 guys, I'd be starting with at least 2 of them right now. You might have to go off of like a Rory because he's a little bit expensive out there in cash, but I would be starting with guys that are in the proper portion of tee times and that also played well in round 1. So I'm actually not sure about Cam Young's tee times. So let me double check on him before I'm giving you false information. So yeah, he's closer to midday with this tee time. So it's not a bad one by any means, but these top 5 are probably my preferred cash options. And the main reason being is that they're getting some ownership, which actually for cash is advantageous. And on top of that, they have that weather edge that we're looking for. And in all the cases, except for Xander, they've all played well out there for their first round of action. So my top 4 cash plays are probably those top 4. You could add in somebody that wasn't playing as well like Xander if you wanted to, just to give you an idea of how I'm attacking that kind of format. So I'm not a big cash player myself, not going to spend too much time on that aspect. But that's what we got for that. What I'm going to do right now is do our Ship It Nation plug. So give me 1 second while I bring that up. And this live stream, as I mentioned before, is brought to you guys by Ship It Nation. Over there, they have access for DFS stuff for all the different sports out there. So this is a sponsor that not only gives you guys content for golf, as I'm sure a lot of you guys are members at Ship It Nation for, but they also have NFL, NBA, PGA, MMA, NHL, you guys name it, a bunch of different sports you can see on the screen right there, all for the access at a low price. Other tout sites will charge you hundreds of dollars a month out there for access to their optimizers. Ship It Nation is $69 per month for all those different sports. And if you use the code Luke15, you'll get 15% off of that. So it's even cheaper than that. It's one of, if not the best deal in the entire industry when it comes to DFS projections. And you're getting that curated content from guys that actually win GBPs, right? You're not getting this content from guys that are, not even playing DFS lineups like I see for so many of the content creators out there. You're not getting people that are going out there, play DFS for like 6 months and then go out there, make a YouTube channel, a Twitter, right, and try and give advice. You're talking about proven winners, right? Like Tambo Hoop, they don't bring guys onto their team unless they really know their shit. And, I respect all the different sports that they're doing. So make sure to check it out. There's a link in the description of the video if you guys aren't already a part of Ship It Nation. Of course, guys, I post my projections on Patreon. Those are great to have. I know a lot of you in chat are probably already members of my Patreon page, but having access to different DFS sources is huge, right? Obviously, Ship It offers much more than just PGA. They have all those different sports, but even for PGA, right? They have a PGA only section, which I believe is like $33 a month. I have to double check on that. I should know that off the top of my head, but it's much cheaper, right, than what you have for all the different sports there. You should have multiple sets of ownership projections for Showdown, right? They're posting projections for main slate for Showdown out there as well. They've got Hoop and Tambo's core out there. You have Hoops, a player pool that you can compare to, slate plan. I know Lee Aldrich is always posting really good course rankings right over there on the Ship It page. All of that is extremely valuable as well. So if it were me, I'd be a subscriber to both websites. Again, if you're going to join over there and Ship It, use code Luke15 and you will get a 15% discount off of any membership that you guys go with. So like I said, having more sources is great. Aggregating ownership is, I think, a really good way to go about it. if you're somebody out there just playing your own, because there's going to be spots I get wrong, right? I'm going to have ownership projections that I get wrong for any given slate. They're going to have ownership projections that they get wrong for any given slate. Having multiple sources, multiple point of views to go with is, I think, key out there for your DFS process. So that's it for the Ship It Nation stuff over there. I appreciate all you guys for stopping by, and let's get ready to talk some props. So if you were just here for DFS, I appreciate all you guys for stopping by. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and subscribe so you don't miss the round 3 and 4 live streams. We're not done here. We still have a lot to go through. I am pumped up to take on these prop boards. I am ready to get back after it out there for round 2. Not our best stuff for round 1, but hey, that means we're due for a bounce back out here for Friday. So going to start talking about props. If you're just here for DFS, best of luck with that exposure. And just the only thing I ask before you're hopping out of here is smash that like button, and let's get this over 100 live likes. So they've got just over 100 people here. I think it's a little bit of an ask, but if all of you could hit the like button, it's not difficult, right? You just got to take your mouse. You can see my mouse on here. Just move it down there to the bottom left. Go ahead and smash that like button for me. Where are we at? Let's catch up on a few questions before we fully hop into the prop side of things. Where are we at? Let's get it. Shout out to Sanjay for looking human today. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. He looked finally back on track. I mean, the guy who had been injured, he'd been battered, bruised for the last month or so. So that's good to see. Am I having a good GPP? I am having a good GPP so far. Yeah. Just to get an idea, I didn't check when the round just ended. So I know I was up money in all the contests that I'm in, but let me see exactly how much I'm up. So in the big GPP, I'm actually down a little bit further from where I was before. So I'm about a neutral out there for my GPP exposure, but all my single entries are doing really well. So my I actually took a little bit of a tumble. It looks like the Rory Aberg finishes took me a little bit further down the board, but we're in a respectable spot. I feel pretty good about where we are after round 1. That's for sure. What's going on? Let's ship it. Absolutely. Poston and Denny are your core for ship it's. Okay. I'm a little bit hesitant on Poston because of the ownership, but he's playing well. And yeah, I agree with you. Ship it is where it's at. I've been over there in the Discord for the last few days. Definitely a really cool community. And like I said, I would recommend joining both sites. That's my take on it. You guys, I know a lot of you down here are already a part of my channel, but hey, if you're over there at Ship It, I'd recommend coming over to my side too, right over there on the Patreon page. It's really cheap. My Patreon page is $15 for my DFS stuff every month. And like I said, it's always good to have multiple opinions, right? Multiple perspectives for whatever you're doing. What I'm going to do here is I want to bring up my projections, my stat averages from round 2 real quick. So bear with me while I do that so we can start talking about props. And like I said, I've got a little bit of revenge to get back out here on these sports books. So I'm definitely hyped for this section. This is going to be about as hard as I work on props probably ever, because I'm fired up after how today went. So let's talk through this. So the stat averages, stroke average was 1.64 under par, but what we really want to focus on, right, are the birdie or better and then the bogey average. So birdie or better, and about the easiest round we could possibly get here was only 3.92 per round. Your bogey average was 2.04 per round. So something to know is that the bogey average went way down compared to last year, where it was closer to like 2.5, 2.6 back there in 2023. This year, more than half a bogey lower. So that led to the scoring average. The birdie average actually didn't change very much, right? Last year, the birdie average, I should say, out there for the field was like 3.6, sometimes between 3.8 per round. So that didn't go up nearly as much as this bogey average went down. So what that tells me is that that lack of rough made it a little bit easier to save par out there, but that didn't lead to a lot more birdies. So that's just something to note right out there for round 2, because the wind conditions, because the, firmness and fast, how fast the greens are running is probably not going to change very much overnight. I think a lot of these stat averages are pretty valuable, right? With similar conditions, right? With similar level of winds, we're not going to expect these to move all that much. Now, the one real X factor is going to be pin locations, which I want to refresh this and see if we have them yet. So yeah, it looks like we have them for the RBC Heritage. We might as well go through these hole by hole. So I already mentioned that I really want to get after it, right? Try and get after these sports books. The only difference conditions-wise that I could see would be if the pin locations or tee boxes are harder. Now, tee boxes aren't going to be something that we're able to check on out here before the round starts, but we can go through some of these pin locations. So this is going to take us some time, but this is where you can really find an edge out there for props. So bear with me while we do this. We're going to go hole by hole, and I'm going to give you guys an idea of whether these pins are going to be easier or harder than what we saw today. So we have the pin sheet up over here. We're going to be glancing back and forth real quick. So try and stay with me here. It's going to be quick. We're going to try and make this not take forever to do. So over here on the left side, we have a left side pin location. So it's a good ways on and it's 6 paces off the left side. I would say that it's a pretty neutral pin location. I would say if anything, it's like maybe like 5% harder than what you have for this first one. It's a pretty simple pin location, right? It's well onto the green. It's not like tucked just over the bunker or anything. It's a good ways onto the green. And it's not like it's a long hole, right? It's a 400-yard hole to start with. So I think all things considered, pretty similar to what we saw for today. Hole 2 is a par 5. And are we sure this is a new set of pins? They had like the same pin today. So it's a similar pin location. So for round 1, right, the pin location is where you can see here on the screen. It's a little bit further back in this corner out here from round 2. So just like hole number 1, it looks almost identical to what we're going to see for round 2. So not much of a change there. Hole 3 is now on the front left. So round 1, it was a little bit closer towards the middle back. Now it's going to be over here in this front left corner. So it's going to play to a shorter distance. And because it's not a long hole, it'll be about a 445-yard hole. You're going to be hitting something like a wedge, maybe like a 9-8 iron at the very most, if you decide to lay back a little bit. So I think that this front pin location will help for that reason, right? You're not hitting a long iron into one of those front pins. You'll have the room to perhaps spin a ball back to it. And I think that it's going to be easier than what we had for today. Hole 4 is a back right pin. So this looks harder on paper, but it's actually a lot easier than today. So this is why we have to look at the pin locations with their slopes. Over here to the left, it brought the water more in play, and you saw a lot of players just bearing out to the right? The safe shot on this hole is to hit it towards the middle of the screen. What you have for tomorrow is a slightly longer hole, but at the same time, you have some slope over here to the left, which will feed any shot that's missing left over towards this pin location, and it's away from the water, right? You're playing away from the hazard. If you miss over here to the right, it's pretty simple up and down. In fact, if you miss short right over here, you have a little bit of a backstop you can use to get the ball closer. Hole 4 will be easier as well. So far we have 2 easier holes and then 2 holes that are pretty neutral, right? All things considered. Hole 5 is a front left pin, so another shorter hole. So round 1, right, played to this back pin. Now it's going to play shorter out there on that front ledge. So I think the up and down is pretty similar, right, regardless of where they put this pin location. But in terms of trying to get home in 2, I think you're going to have a much better shot out there on that front ledge. Hole 6, and that's 3 easier pins now. So that's important to note, I suppose. Hole number 6, I should say, is over here in this middle right section. A little bit towards the front, I would say, like middle right front over here where my cursor is. I would say it's easier than what you had today, right? This pin location from round 1 was in the very back, right, towards the smallest part of the screen. Now it's at the fatter section of the green, and it's going to play shorter, right? It's going to be a wedge in at about 400 yards. So that's 4 pins that are easier now. Hole 7 is another front pin. Oh, wow. They want to see some scoring, guys. I mean, look at hole 7, right? It's going to play shorter than what they had today, and it's in that bowl, right? You have this little slope behind it. You have this little slope to the side. This tree to the left is going to be pretty pesky. People will hit that tree, sometimes go into the water. But if you can avoid that tree, maybe hit a little draw in there because of the slopes on the green, you can get that thing close. So I'm going to say neutral for hole 5, but that was almost like a 5th easier hole in a row. Hole 8 is a middle back pin, so this one looks a little bit harder. So it's going to play longer than what we had from round 1, but I would say in terms of getting up and down is pretty similar, and yeah, just slightly harder there. So yeah, we'll say harder there for hole 8, but not by that much. Hole number 9 is over here to the left side. So round 1, it was on the right little corner. Now it's going to be over here to the left. I would say that it's a pretty similar up and down. The one place the miss is going to be over here to the left side. So it's all going to depend on wind direction, which, just to check, it's the same wind direction that we had for today, which is going to make this hole play downwind. So it's going to be playing downwind just like round number 1. So if you can miss to the left side over here, you do have some slope that'll help you get it closer to this pin location. I think you're going to see a lot of people going for this green off the tee, especially with that wind direction. And the pin location is pretty easy, though. And I don't think it's easier than round 1, but it's still pretty easy, I would say. Hole number 10. So hole 10, starting in the back 9, is tucked over here towards the left. I would say that this one's easier because it's shorter and further away from the hazard. So that is we're getting a theme here, right? So the whole point of doing this is to kind of see how they're setting up the golf course. And at least to me, it looks like they're trying to get some scoring. That's what I'm seeing from a lot of these pin locations. Hole number 11 is over here towards the middle right. It's at the fat side of the green as opposed to the back corner. So just like I said earlier, easier pin location, right? And the X factor here is that it's in a little bit of a bowl, right? If you miss way over here to the left, it's going to funnel you closer to the center of the screen. If you miss a little bit long, you have a backstop here that's going to stop the ball closer to this pin location. So, wow, again, this is kind of crazy. I'm glad we went through this now before we started talking about props, because if it continues like this, it's going to play a lot easier. So hole number 12 is a hole that's going to play harder. So it was over here on this really thin section, which is a pretty tricky pin location, all things considered. But now it's going to play in this back portion, which you do have to carry it over this bunker. It's not an impossible pin location, but I would say even slightly trickier than this tricky pin location from round one. So there are a few that are harder, but a lot more, right, that look simple. Hole 13 is a shorter par 4. It's over here in the back right corner. So in terms of distance, it's not going to change much compared to what we had today. And now that it's not tucked just over the sand bunker, I think it's going to play easier, right? It's over here towards the right. So this right miss in the bunker could come a little bit more into play, but you'd have to really whiff it to hit it over there in the bunker, right? Any well-struck iron shot is going to have a better chance of getting close to this pin location because you can afford to be more aggressive, right? Over the back here is a much more simple up and down than trying to get up and down out of this bunker. Is sometimes you get right next to those bulkheads next to the green complex. So another easier pin location, in my opinion. Let's go to 14. Didn't mean to click 12 there. So hole number 14 is a middle right. I would say that this one's similar to round one, right? It's over here towards the water, just like today, but playing a little bit shorter. So maybe a little bit easier than what we had for round one, but still pretty tricky pin location. Hole number 15 is here in the middle left. So over here on this portion of the green, and it's a par 5. So I think if you're going for this 1 and 2, you're going to have a better chance to get it close because first off, it's not tucked just on the front, right? Which is almost impossible to get close to with a 3-wood, right? That's what you have to hit to reach 15 and 2. But now that's here in the back right, you have more room to release a shot up to it. It's going to play downwind just like it did today because we have that same wind direction as I just mentioned. And then all the slope's going to help you, right? You have the slope back here that'll stop the golf ball. You have the slope towards the middle of the green, right? That'll work it to the left. So I could see guys going for it in 2 and perhaps making an eagle here. But in terms of getting up and down, I think it's a harder up and down, right? Because most people aren't going to miss over here to the left. What's kind of hard to tell, unless you look at this hole overhead, is that to hit it to the left side of the screen, if you're going for it in 2 at least, right, you'd have to hit a massive hook around these trees. And that's a long shot. That's like 300 yards. Even downwind today, not a bunch of people were getting to the screen in 2. So the up and down to this pin location on the left is not going to be easy, right? Because most of your misses are going to be over here to the right side or long right over here towards this back portion. And you can see that the slope is down slope, right, down to that hole. So it's not an impossible up and down. You're going to have a lot of green to work with. So, I think all things considered, it's a pretty similar pin location to today, but it's not way easier like some people would think, right? Because the up and down, I think, is a little bit harder. But if you're going for the green in 2, I think it gives you more incentive to do so. So your power players like a Rory, Aberg, etc., they're definitely going to try and get home in 2 if they can. Hole number 16 is next. Let's check on that one. So 16 is a back middle pin location. So maybe slightly over here towards the left, a little bit longer than round 1, and probably a little bit trickier. So I'd say that one's a little bit harder. Hole 17 is a front pin. So I would say this one's easier than what we had today, right? Going to play shorter. And you also do have a little bit of a bull effect over here towards the front right. And then hole 18, a long little par 4, is going to be a front pin location. And this is a harder hole to begin with. It's hard to get close to some of these front pins. So though the back pin wasn't easy, I don't think this front pin is going to be any easier. So probably a neutral pin location. But after doing this, right, there were 3, maybe 4 holes that were playing slightly harder, and then 7 or 8, right, that we would say were playing easier than what we had for round 1. So in terms of scoring conditions, your weather is arguably even better for round 2 than what we had for today. And then your pin locations, which we just went through hole by hole, I would also say maybe look even better than what we had for today. So Scoring average, I would put right around this 1.6 under par. I do think the course is going to be a little bit firmer and faster than what we had for Thursday, but with the lower winds and the easier pin locations, that probably makes up for that. So these scoring averages that we looked at, right, this birdie, this bogey average, I think are going to be spot on. I would be pretty shocked to see them that far off than what we have here, right? Scoring average probably between like 1.5 under par and maybe 1.6 under par, or something in that range, pretty similar to today, right? Birdie average probably close to like 4 birdies per round. Bogey average probably close to this 2 bogeys per round that we had. So we can keep all of that in mind when we go through these boards. What's going on, Carbon? Hopefully you're having a solid day. Let's talk through some of these props. So that's it for the research, right? I know it was a lot. I know it takes a lot of time, but hey, we got to do it if we want to have a really good prop slate. So I'm going to do some line shopping now. So I haven't taken a look at Prize Picks quite yet. They got some guys at 4.5. Your mid to lower tier guys at 4. Okay, that's good to see. My strokes lines are pretty much where I expected them to be, like 2, maybe 2.5 under par for a majority of your players, it looks like. Your greens are similar to round 1. Okay, that's good to know. And then your fairways are also pretty similar to where they priced them for round 1. So the Prize Picks board, if anything, went down a little bit with birdies, which I think was a pretty sharp move out there. I thought they had their birdies too high out there for round 1. And then their stroke stuff and all that stayed pretty much exactly the same. So I don't really disagree there. Now I want to look at Prize Picks. So a lot of the same birdie stuff. I'm looking at the birdie projections first because I think there could be some value out there on the birdie board. So let me see what we're working with. So you got Sam Burns at 4. That kind of sticks out to me as a decent play. But let's keep going through these. They have Scotty at 4.5. They have Jordan at 4.5. If Jordan was 4 birdies, I would be nuking the over. They have JT at 4 birdies. Okay. So yeah, there's definitely going to be some overs on birdies that we can take. So what we need to do here is find the correct ones now, right? Try and find the guys that are going off relatively early. And Xander kind of stuck out. Did they have Xander at 5 birdies, or is he also at 4.5 over here? So they don't have him up for a birdie projection over here on Prize Picks, but it feels like, let me see if FanDuel has any odds up yet. So something I like to do too, right, is I obviously like to look at the sportsbook odds and get an idea for where they're projecting it. They're going to post guys like Xander up for birdies when they actually post that board. So let me see if they have those up yet. So yeah, it doesn't look like they have those up quite yet, but something tells me that they're going to have guys like him juiced well over. Or like the birdie average for the field's about 4. He's been making well over a birdie to the field over his last 12 measured rounds. So let's throw that one at least in the cart for right now. So let's find Xander. Again, I'm looking for him to have a pretty big bounce back day tomorrow. And at 4.5 birdies, right, gain 1 birdie to the field. I think that's pretty realistic, especially with these pin locations. So I'm going to throw him in there. And I almost prefer these elite tier guys at 4.5 over these guys at 4 with push equity, right? Because the pushes on these sites aren't that favorable to you. They're a little bit more favorable in Underdog than they are compared to Prize Picks, but they're still not great, right? If you're pushing, you're getting your money back over here in Underdog. Prize Picks, they're screwing you with the payout. So I'm not a big push guy anymore when it comes to that. So Burns, I do like it 4, but I would almost rather find one of these 4.5s that's for an elite tier player. So if Scotty didn't have this 0.9x, he would be a prime candidate for that. So unfortunately, he does have that 0.9x though, so we can't do that. So let's go a little bit earlier in the tee times. I don't want to go too late. I mean, Aberg's been on fire. It's hard not to want to tail that, but I also worry about some regression with Ludwig Aberg. I worry that he's going to come a little bit down to earth, but who knows? Maybe he just continues it, keeps it going. You have guys like Cantlay at 4.5. Cantlay's got the putter back, which is intriguing. He gained a bunch of strokes putting today. Now, that can be a little bit volatile for players, but that's kind of what Cantlay does. Do we take the 2 butt buddies together, right, Xander and Cantlay, and make it a slip? You know what? We're doing it. All right. These 2 are best friends. I think they share wives when they go on vacation. It would not surprise me to hear that from Xander Schauffele and Patrick Cantlay, but they're both going off early. They're 4.5. They're elite tier birdie makers in this field. And I think Xander's going to bounce back. Did not have great shots gained metrics today, but Cantlay hit the ball close, was really doing this stuff with the around the green, and got back to the putter. The putter had been atrocious all of 2024, and now Xander's finally back to making birdies. Patrick Cantlay, I should say, is finally back to making some birdies. I'll take those two for over. So the earlier tee times, Cantlay's going off at like 9 a.m. Xander has what I think is like the perfect tee time at like 10:40. So we'll take those over there on Underdog. On Prize Picks, they don't even have those two up, which is kind of annoying. Again, it's I think because they know, right? They project closer to 5 birdies than they do for 4.5. So they'd rather post guys that are a little bit lower tier, right? Like they'll post a Spieth who's kind of out of form, right? They'll post, Wyndham Clark, who doesn't really fit this golf course, a Justin Thomas, right, who's in kind of sketchy form, and not give us guys like a Xander and Cantlay. So, if they're not going to give us that option on Prize Picks, we'll do it over here on Underdog. So we'll take those. Over here on Prize Picks, though, there's got to be some value to find. Now, it kind of looks like the birdie board is more attractive on Underdog. So maybe let's take a look at the strokes. And FanDuel didn't have stuff up, but let me see if Draftkings does, because obviously they post odds too. So those wouldn't be terrible to compare, especially for strokes. So here's RBC Heritage, round props. And yep, got them posted. So let's see where the sports books have stuff. So they've got Cantlay at 68.5, and he's actually juiced a little bit under. Where does Prize Picks have him? Now, this isn't a prop I really want to take, but yeah, he would be somebody you could take for the under at 68.5. And honestly, I don't hate that. What is he at on Underdog? In fact, I almost prefer. So he is at 68. So you can see, right? Obviously, they have that lower there. Let me guess, Xander's also at 68. So yeah, he's a little bit too low. Cantlay over here on Prize Picks, though, at 68.5. I don't hate. Now, I'm not sure if I want to double up on Cantlay and get too much exposure to one player. But if you can't play Underdog for some reason and you want to get exposure to Cantlay, a 68.5 makes sense. Right? Obviously, if I think he's going to make 5 birdies, that's going to give him a good chance to shoot -3. And, if he makes the 5 birdies, he just can't make 3 bogeys or more. Right? If he makes 2 bogeys, that would be fine. He'd still cover that 68.5. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty decent prop. So I might circle back and end up playing that myself. In fact, there's probably a good chance I end up adding that at some point here this evening. But for the sake of the live stream slips, I don't want to double up, right? I'm going to spread out our exposure a little bit for what I'm giving you guys here. So let's find a few other props to take. It's worth noting that the green regulation average was nearly 12.5 today, which was much higher than what we had in the past. And with these pin locations, they looked pretty simple. We might even have a higher one out here for round 2. So if we wanted to take some of these greens in regulation, we'd want some middle morning tee times, right? Guys going off when it's going to be a little bit warmer and also relatively calm. You think taking Cantlay under 68.5 and more than 4.5 both looked good? Yeah, I'm with you on that. And yeah, the 68.5 I like too. You don't know if I respond to comments, but can you please look at it? Yes. And I agree with you on that. I didn't see your comments and I got to them anyways. So it's a good sign for you. I didn't even see your comment and we both like the same thing. It's on Prize Picks. Yeah. And hey, you only need to comment once, my man. I'll see your comment down there. No need to spam it down there in the chat. I got you. No worries on that. So I'm going to look at these green and regulation stuff. So in terms of greens and regulation, it would be overs for guys at 12.5 I'm looking at, and they would have to have the proper tee time. And unfortunately, really the only players that fit that would be a Zalatoris. He's got an early enough tee time, and he's also at 12.5. And then I guess Fitzpatrick, right? He's also in that kind of wave. But the issue with these two is that they've not been very good with the irons this year. So let's go ahead, bring up the PGA Tour website, and I want to circle back on their green and regulation averages. Now, I think Zalatoris is doing a pretty decent job with greens and reg, so we'll probably be able to take that prop if we want to. But I am slightly worried about Fitzpatrick. Now he's had a pretty decent year, especially over the last maybe 4 weeks. He's played a lot better than his first month, but I still want to circle back and check because I'm not going to take somebody who's not playing well with greens regulation. So where are you at, Zalatoris? Let's see. So Zalatoris is number 86 on tour in greens and reg. That's actually not great, but he's been better lately. Let me take a look at Fitz. Fitz is probably better than that. Yeah, Fitz is number 49 on tour. So I guess the guy I should be worried about would be Zalatoris, but I'm not really worried about it. So this might be a spot to take, right? You've got Fitz, who I think has one of the better tee times. So not, especially because he's number 49, he's actually better than I thought in green and regulation percentage. It's probably not the worst spot to take. And then Zalatoris, let's double check on how he played today. But I'm pretty sure he hit almost all his greens. He had a very steady round. He might have missed 4 or 5 greens by the end of the round. But let's see. Yeah, he hit 13 of 18 greens. So he missed 5 on the round. Would have been 0.5 over this prop today. And let's see if he had any fringes. Because if he had any fringes, that's the... So he had a slight miss there. Obviously didn't miss the par 5. Was that a fringe? Nope. Is that a fringe? Nope. Okay, so it doesn't look like any fringes, right? He just missed number 8. He whiffed that one. He hit 9. Obviously, it's drivable. Was that a miss? Nope, hit the green there. All right, so I was going to say, I was seeing if we had any like fringes, right? Just like misses that shouldn't have been misses. It doesn't look like we really had that today. So, but still played some pretty beautiful golf, right? Even saved par at 12. I had his over on bogeys today. He saved par from the woods. Hit the ball in the woods, had to lay up out with a wedge, and then got up and down from there with like a 40-foot putt. So that was a little bit tilting for the bogey thing, but hey, it's nothing you can do about it. I know he missed this par 5, 15, so that was a little bit atypical of Will Zalatoris. But outside of that, was just laser-like with the irons, right? Missed number 17, yet still went over. Yeah, we're going to be taking Zalatoris. He didn't even have that great of a round, right? He was actually a loser on approach today and gained with the greens and regulation. So I like that. I'm expecting him to honestly play even better with the irons going off early. So that's a combination that we'll take over there in prize picks. That's really all I'm looking at this point. We'll take a look at Underdog a little bit more. But unless you guys have any questions for me, probably going to be pretty close to done with this live stream. So let me know if you have anything down there in live chat. But those are the 2 main slips we're going to go with. What I want to take a look at here are whether there's any other birdie props that we could take. So like Rory kind of stands out to me, right? Like Rory's not up here for birdies for a reason, in my opinion, right? They're posting these other guys at 4.5, but not Rory because he's a top end player. So, and he's got the perfect tee time too. So let's throw him in there. And let's throw Aberg too. So I'm going to throw those 2 in together. They're playing in the same tee time, right? So we've got the Xander and Cantlay slip because they're butt buddies. And I'm going to throw in Rory and Aberg here because they might be able to draw some momentum off each other, right? Today, they both got off to really hot starts. They're going to have probably the best conditions of the day tomorrow. And I think pin locations look pretty favorable for these players. So in my opinion, there's a reason why Prize Picks isn't posting those sort of players at that number. And if we take a look at the birdie or better matchups, right, they have Scotty versus Aberg, right? So obviously that's a head-to-head right there. And Scotty's at 5 birdies, right? So probably Aberg would be at 5 birdies, right? If they were posting them over there in Prize Picks. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and take out there for those props. Added in a second slip over there. Maybe we can add a second slip on Prize Picks. Why not, right? I mean, I'm going to be doing this anyways off stream, right? Adding slips anyway. So might as well do this for you guys here. So we already did a green and reg. So let's look at the strokes board. Because the strokes board is better on Prize Picks. In my opinion, the birdie board is better over there on Underdog. So now let's look at the strokes board over on this side. So I don't hate a Batia going off early. He's been so good lately too. So I'm actually going to throw him in there. Let me see if they have odds on Batia. They might not. Yeah, they don't have the full board up yet out here for strokes, but let me see. Yeah, no Batia props yet. So we can't compare to that, but honestly, it feels like that's probably solid value. So let's throw him in there for this slip. Kirk, if he had a better tee time, is somebody I'd be looking at. I don't hate Harris English. I wish he was a better player, but I don't hate him. Who else do we have? I don't really like the 68.5 shooting -3. It's doable. You're going to have a lot of these top tier players do it, but it has to be the right sort of tee time for me to get there. These are the main 2 leans right now. I'm not sure if we're going to take Harris English. Let me double check on these shots gained metrics. So I know Batia was kind of shaky across the board. So just to show you guys those stats so you can see exactly what I know about him. Where are you at? So Akshay gained with the putter, lost a bunch around the green, was a slight gainer on approach, and then lost a bunch off the tee, which honestly, him losing off the tee is extremely rare. So I'm not sure we're going to see that again. And yet he still shot even par, right? He had this pretty lackluster round, yet still got it in at a 71. So I'm pretty okay with taking him there. Let's take a look at Harris English. So Harris English today, he lost on approach, but it was only a little bit and then gained everywhere else. It's pretty typical for Harris English. So I got to say, I don't love these 2 props over there, but I don't hate them, particularly the Batia one, because it feels like he's due for a bounce back. He had that shitty round, but given the form that he's been in, I mean, if we take a look at recent form, just to give you an idea on my other tab, Akshay Batia is the number 2 player in the field, right? The only guy playing better than him over his last 12 measured rounds is Scotty Scheffler, right? Scotty Scheffler is getting 3.7 shots gained per round. You'd probably be mind blown to hear that Akshay Batia is gaining 3 strokes per round, right, on average. So obviously this is an elite tier field, but even if we're only giving him half the strokes gained, right? We'll say he gains like a half, a stroke and a half out here in the signature field. A stroke and a half gain to the field is like 3 under par, right? If I think the stroke average is going to be 1.5 under, well, if he goes out there and he gains a stroke and a half, that's a -3 round. So yeah, we're going to take Akshay. The form's just too good for me not to take him. Harris English isn't playing poorly, but he's also not playing amazing golf, right? So I'm maybe not as bullish on him as it would be with an Akshay Bhatia. So let's find a pairing. Maybe it's a birdie prop that we can take. Again, I like those elite tier guys a little bit more over there on Underdog. In terms of tee times, none of these really work except for Fitz. And frankly, Fitz isn't anywhere near the sort of player that we were taking on those guys on Underdog. So I don't love these birdie props. It feels like they're kind of cherry picking who they posted here over here on this side. And they picked a lot of the guys that just aren't my favorite picks when it comes to taking birdie or better spots. So let me take a look at fairways. Fairway average for today, just to remind ourselves, was 9.11, right? So only 9 fairways per round. And almost everyone they have posted is over that number, right? Like even these lower tier guys like a Homa, Sahith Thagala, et cetera, are over that. Sam Burns is allergic to hitting fairways. And I want to see how he's doing in 2024. Something makes me think that he's probably doing a little bit better this year than the years past because it used to just be atrocious out there for Sam Burns. But let's dive in, shall we? So let's see. Sam Burns driving accuracy. He's number 54 on tour. That is way better than I expected to see. So maybe I got to put some respect on Sam Burns' name. Let's see what he did out here today driving wise. Because I didn't track him very much. I love him for Showdown. That's for damn sure. But let's see what he looked like. So in terms of driving accuracy, he hits, I'm guessing probably 10 fairways. He only hit 8 fairways today. Well, it feels like a pretty solid under, right? Obviously, he went under today. But just to show you what I'm talking about, where we go back to like 2022, 2023, Sam Burns is number 138 on tour in driving accuracy. Year before that, right? 162. Year before that, 124, right? Like this number 54 for Sam Burns in driving accuracy is way, way better than what he's used to. So for now, this is going to be the combination that I have loaded in, but let me double check before we actually fire on it and make it a second slip. So greens and reg. Yeah, we need a fade, right? Because I want this to be a 3x payout if we can. So we already took a few of those overs, right? Matty Fitz, also Will Zalatoris. So we'll stay away from there. Pars are better. I didn't like that board. We already looked at the stroke stuff, and then birdies were better. Yeah, we looked at that too. All right, we'll go with this. So this will be the second slip on Prize Picks. So it'll be this under on Bhatia. Again, if he gains a stroke to the field, he's going to go easily under the 69.5 line. Just needs to shoot -2 on what I think will be a day with like a 1.5 under par scoring average. Has the early tee time. And then Sam Burns, the tee time I'm not that worried about, right? I mean, I think it's not going to be that windy the entire day. So it's not so much that. It's more so that this guy cannot hit fairways typically, right? This year going a little bit better than him for him than what he's seen in the past. But I'll take a bet on that regression all day, right? This is a guy who's never been hitting fairways. He's always a little bit more aggressive. And something to note about the whole fairway thing is that hole number 9 has a big story in what happens here. So believe it or not, Sam Burns laid up today. I would have expected him to go for hole number 9 green, but you can see he laid up in the fairway and then just missed the green, which is kind of surprising. Your elite tier bombers, I mean, let me just show you what they did, right? Guys like an Aberg, right, drove the green at hole number 9, right? They went for it off the tee. If you're going to go for hole number 9 off the tee, like a Sam Burns probably will for round 2, I mean, you're going to have a hard time hitting the short stuff there, right? And I think with that left pin location, it's really set up to get up and down from the left side. That you're going to see guys just bomb it out there to the left and miss the fairway. So I think that helps taking unders and guys like a Sam Burns. Other guys that would also go for that green would be like a Sahith Thagala. A Tony Finau is probably going to go for that green off the tee. Who else? Scotty Scheffler, right? And Aberg is going to go for that green off the tee. Those guys all get a slight bump down in driving accuracy because of that one hole. Now, is that going to completely change their projection? No, right? But if you're already talking about a guy who's inaccurate off the tee like a Sam Burns, and then you add in the fact that he's probably going to go for 9 this time around, you can see why I'd want to take his under, right? And today he only hit 8 of the 14 fairways, and that was still with laying up on hole 9, right? And getting that one for free. So I like that quite a bit. We went over the 2 slips over here in Underdog as well. And I think that's all we're going to have, guys. So let's catch up down on chat and then hop on out of here. Under 69 for prize picks, minus 155 on DK. Yeah, let's check it out. Is he under 69.5 though at minus 155? Because if so, that really changes things, right? So yeah, he is at 69.5. I agree with you. I think his proper projection is probably close to 69, maybe 68.5. But that's accounted for in the odds, right? That's why he's at 69. So yeah, he's got the best odds. You got to keep in mind that it's been bumped 0.5. That changes things quite a bit. But I get what you're saying. I agree with you. I do like that under. I think it makes sense, but you got to keep that in mind. You really like Collins over 4.5 birdies. He had 7 today and 4 on the front. Yeah, I'm not going to overreact to a 1-round sample, right, when it comes to any of that. But I think guys at 4.5, you could take some overs on, that's for sure. We know given rest. Just wanted to make sure he sees it before the live ends. You're good, dude. Just yeah, if you say it once, you're good down there in chat. I go through, do my spiels. I like to go through my own analysis, and then I circle back to the chat. So there might be like 3-4 minutes, right, where I'm not going over chat, but I promise I'll get back to it. And I think it's your first time here, so you wouldn't have known that, right? So just, yeah, for the future, no need to post things more than once. I guess the last thing I'll go through on here is if you're playing DK Pick 6, let's bring that up. I always forget to do this, but I need to do it more often because I know some of you guys, that's your main way to get exposure. They have some of the guys at 4.5 that I could think you could take for some overs. But what I usually like to find are guys that are just severely mispriced, right? So they have some guys at 3.5 birdies, which to me, this is a mistake, right? Like to have guys at 4, I think made sense because of the push equity, but there's going to be some value for these guys at 3.5. So just a few that kind of stick out, and these tee times aren't correct, right? So you're going to have to double check on another tab. So let me do that. So let me check on Tom Hoge and Russell Henley's tee times. So Henley's going off a little bit later, and Tom Hoge is an early tee time, right? So Tom Hoge at 3.5, count my ass in. I'll take an over at 3.5. Let me see. Let me check Grillo's tee time. I thought Grillo was going off pretty early, but let me double check that to make sure I'm not spewing any fake news out here. Where are we at, Grillo? He's got a 10:55. Maybe not early enough for me. So we'll leave him off for now. We can always circle back on him if we have to. Let's find a 3.5 for an early guy that makes a bunch of birdies. All right, so we're looking for birdie or better percentage in early tee time. Nick Taylor, he would fit both of those. I know he's got a relatively early, I think like a 10:40 tee time, something around that. They have JT at 3.5. I don't even care if JT has a later tee time. I'll take the over on it, right? The birdie average for the field's close to 4 birdies. So we'll mix that in. Oh boy, I wish I could play pick 6, guys. This board is free. And now it's not like this is like guaranteed to hit by any means, but like if you gave me like 4 or 5 slips, I'm banging one with these props. I mean, these are soft to say the least. These are soft projections, and I love them. So let's see what else we can find on here. So 68.5 for some of your elite tier guys. Okay. I don't love those as much. These birdie props I like a whole lot, especially these 3.5s. Bogeys are worse, 2.5. I mean, you'd want unders at 2.5 if anything, like a Jordan Spieth under 2.5. Like, yeah, like sure, I'll toss that in. Not doing pars, I'm not doing fantasy points. So we'll make these our 4 pick 6 picks. I think you can do a 4-man. Again, I've literally never played pick 6, so I don't know if you have to have 6 picks to go with it. But in my opinion, these 4 are severe misprices. And in fact, if we had these sort of lines of like prize picks or underdog, I'd be playing them for like 2-unit plays over there on that side. So I know the payouts on pick 6, I've heard that they're not great, that they're still trying to get it all together. I also heard that their pushes over there, they actually count as a loss. So that's why they put all of them as 0.5 lines now. So they're trying to avoid those pushes. That's what I would consider over there for that. So yeah, you can see it's currently unavailable in my location. So it's kind of shitty, but hey, it is what it is. I'll go over the content for you guys and make sure you guys are all set. Where are we at? You said Zalatoris more than 12.5 on prize picks. Yeah, so I'll circle back on that. It was Zalatoris and it was Matty Fitz. So it was this 12.5 I was taking it over on, and then Matty Fitz. Both players that are playing pretty decently to this point. They have the early tee times I'm looking for, and the green regulation average today was 12.35. So it was about that. So you're looking for these guys to gain about, half a green to the field to go out there and hit. And considering the weather that they're going to be playing in, and just the players that they are, I like that. So took those two. All right, that's all I've got for the live stream, guys. Going to go ahead and cut it off here. If you haven't already smashed that like button, the only thing I ask for you for watching this live stream is to go ahead and hit that for me. So it's down there in the bottom left. You guys know where to find it. And subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already as well. Going to be doing live streams for rounds 3 and 4. So make sure to check those out throughout the weekend. And best of luck for all of your Friday exposure. Today, right, pretty solid start to DFS. So let's keep that going over the weekend. And then for props, hopefully it can be a little bit of a bounce back day. So I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully we can cash on all of that exposure and we can find some winners down in the live chat tomorrow evening. I'll catch you guys then and appreciate all the support here on the channel as per usual.